This man is Michael Rivers, a karate master. He was training his daughter, Bree, that day, and after that, he and his daughter visited the grave of his wife who had died 3 years ago. The next day, Michael took part in a karate competition where karate masters from all over America competed against each other. But thanks to his above-average abilities, Michael was able to win the tournament. In the evening, he celebrated his victory with other friends. He then revealed his intention to retire as a fighter and would focus on his dojo and his daughter. Not long afterward, a middle-aged man with long hair approached him. The man claimed to be a businessman who intended to hold a kumite tournament in Europe. Kumite is a term in karate that means sparring or dueling. The man said that the competition he created was different from other competitions where the winner of the tournament would get a prize of $1 million, which of course was way more compared to karate competitions. But Michael had decided to retire and wanted to focus on taking care of his daughter and his dojo, so he refused the man's invitation in a good manner. When Michael returned home, he looked for Bree to tell her the offer he just got, but it turned out that she was not at home. When he checked her room, he found a threat letter in there. He immediately realized that the person who kidnapped his daughter was related to the long-haired man, so like it or not, he was forced to accept the offer and go to Europe to follow the tournament in the hope of saving Bree. When he got there, he met fighters from all over the world who would later compete against each other. It turned out that almost all the fighters there were forced to take part because their families were kidnapped, just like what happened to him. Not long after, the long-haired man appeared in front of them all, accompanied by his bodyguards. He was Ron Hall, and all this time, he had been holding a kumite by forcing the fighters to take part. The participants demanded him to release their families, but without hesitation, Ron immediately ordered his men to shoot all the participants who were against him. On the other hand, Bree, along with the families of the other participants, were locked in cells, and they who had just heard the gunshots were worried lest their families were killed. Ron explained the rules of the tournament where the fighters would duel to death, and the winner would get $1 million. Apart from that, the winner's family would also be released without a scratch. They could use cell phones but were prohibited from using the internet, and as a leeway, they could leave the location to look for necessities in the city. After that, Ron introduced his best fighter, Draco, who would later take part in the tournament too. Since the first time the tournament was held, no one was able to beat him. After hearing Ron's explanation, the fighters were invited to their respective rooms. In his room, Michael met a waiter named Chris. Apparently, he was a former fighter who worked for Ron. He was forced to do that because he didn't want to be killed. Unfortunately, it's hard for him to escape from there, especially after his leg was crippled because of what Ron did. Before leaving, Chris said that there was one person who knew Draco's weakness, and he promised to introduce him to Michael. On the other hand, there were two fighters, Lee and Damon, who were at a training ground. Lee said that he refused Ron's invitation, but the man instead kidnapped his sister, so she had no other choice but to fight. Meanwhile, Damon said that Ron had kidnapped his wife, but he told Lee that he didn't want to fight because he didn't trust Ron. He also thought that someone like Ron wouldn't keep his promises, therefore, he decided to go to the city so he could go to the police station to report Ron. But sadly, when he did that, the police couldn't help because Ron had bribed the police chief, and inevitably, Damon had to go back to Ron's place and do what Ron wanted. Michael finally met the man Chris mentioned. He is Lauren, a janitor at Ron's place who was once a fighter and even had a duel with Ron. According to Chris, he was the only person who knew Draco's weaknesses, so Michael could learn from him if he wanted to defeat Draco. Lauren revealed Ron's past, a deadly karate master who always killed his opponents, but because his family was rich, he was able to get away with murder charges, and in the end, took over the kumite. After that, he changed the tournament into a death match. Because of that, Lauren decided to withdraw from the tournament, but Ron did not accept it and immediately killed Lauren's wife in front of him. After hearing the story, Michael made up his mind to defeat Draco and Ron to win the tournament. Lauren was willing to train him so he could take revenge on Ron, who had killed his wife. He was also helped by his friend to test Michael's abilities, and in this first training, they wanted to increase Michael's speed so he could be ahead of Draco. Meanwhile, the other fighters were training in the gym prepared by Ron. It was seen that each fighter had their own fighting style. In the middle of training, Lee was approached by a fighter named Marcus who belittled her just because she was a woman. Not only that, the man also said that he was different from other fighters. While the others were forced to compete, he wholeheartedly joined. He called himself the bravest fighter there. Fed up, Lee challenged him to duel, but Damon stopped them. Marcus's words also triggered Damon, but the situation didn't escalate. The next day, Michael trained with Lauren again. This time, Lauren invited his friends, a boxer and a karate fighter, to train Michael's punches and endurance. After training, Lauren invited Michael to meet a woman who could treat his internal wounds. Apart from that, this woman had also made herbal concoctions to help increase Michael's stamina. Meanwhile, Draco came to the gym to intimidate the fighters. He also went into Michael's room and taunted him. That night, Michael met Lee and Damon, who were planning a rebellion, but unfortunately, their conversation had been tapped by Ron. And at that very moment, they received a video call from Ron, who threatened to kill their family if they dared to oppose him. They immediately looked for a safe place that wasn't monitored by Ron. Damon suggested that Lee and Michael also invite other fighters to join in the plan, but they refused to invite Marcus. The next day, Michael trained with Lauren again, and this time for special techniques that could be used to beat Draco. It was said that Draco's body was hard as a rock after being injected with steroids and special concoctions from Russia. At the same time, Draco was seen training, but different from Michael's, Draco trained like a maniac and didn't hesitate to kill his sparring mate. 3 days before the tournament, Lauren gave Michael a surprise by introducing him to Draco's former teacher, Julie. Julie was willing to tell him the ways and training methods to defeat Draco, and this training method was very hard, the same as Special Forces training. After training, Julie told Michael that she had been Draco's teacher since he was a kid, but Ron kidnapped Draco and made him the monster he was. Unfortunately, Draco didn't want to return to the right path since then. Meanwhile, Draco was still training because he wasn't satisfied with the result. He said that all his training partners were too weak. That night, Michael couldn't sleep because he kept thinking about Bree. He looked at the photo of Bree and his wife, while hoping that all this would end quickly. The feelings motivated him to train. He would not waste all the training given by Lauren and Julie. The day before the tournament, Ron visited the participants and gave a briefing before the match. After that, the participants trained one last time so that they were better prepared. Long story short, the Kumite was finally started. Michael went to the fighting arena accompanied by Lauren, who was ready to help. Lauren explained that this tournament was funded by corrupt officials, the mafia, and other important people who were willing to pay anything for brutal fights. After opening the tournament, Ron immediately started a match between Draco and one of the participants. As expected, the participant couldn't last long in the fight. Julie seemed disappointed with Draco because, in the past, she trained him so that he could help many people, not to be a murderer. Next, Ron pitted Marcus against one of the weakest participants, and as a result, Marcus was able to deal with the opponent very easily. After that, one after another match started and the audiences were entertained, especially since many participants died. Then it was Damon's turn to fight a black belt karate expert, but he was completely calm to face him. After Damon won the fight, it was time for Lee to fight against a Big Ma, but he was no match for Lee's skills. Long story short, the entire first round of the match was finished, and Ron decided to delay the next round. While waiting for the next match, Damon met Lee to make an agreement that if one of them won, they had to look for the other's family. The next day, the next round of the tournament continued, and the match in this round was much more brutal because all the participants who were still standing were strong people. Marcus faced Draco and was immediately knocked out with just a few blows, but when Marcus was about to be finished, Michael immediately ran and saved him. In the next match, Damon had to fight against Lee, and according to the agreement, they would still fight fairly, but the loser had to save all of Ron's prisoners. Ron told Lee to finish off Damon, but the woman chose to leave the arena because if Damon died, then he couldn't let go of the prisoners. In the next match, Ron presented Michael against a Brazilian guy who used a combination of karate and capoeira, but thanks to hard training, Michael was undefeated, and of course, Ron would try to find a way so that the match wouldn't end too quickly. During break time, Lee approached Damon to ask about the condition of his injury. Damon reminded her again that their main plan was to save the prisoners. On the other hand, Ron told the committee to match Michael with a stronger fighter because he knew that Michael was one of the best in this tournament. Then later that night, Ron sent his men to attack Michael to injure him so he wouldn't be as strong as usual. At the same time, Marcus secretly left Ron's headquarters to go to the city. Apparently, he went to the police station to report the current situation at the Kumite, but because the local police didn't want to work with him, Marcus finally revealed his true identity. It turned out that the reason he took part in this tournament voluntarily was because he wanted to investigate the case. He was an agent of the CIA. The next morning, Lauren's friend healed the wound on Michael's hand so that he could continue the match optimally. Lauren convinced Michael that he would be the winner in this tournament and saved Bree. He just needed to keep his injury from his opponent. The fight continued, and this time Lee would face Draco. Draco was about to finish off her, but Ron forbade him because it turned out that the audience liked her fighting style. After that, Ron brought Michael face to face with his next opponent, and even though his hand was injured, Michael's strength didn't decrease at all. With his victory, Michael qualified for the final and would fight the last opponent, Draco, but unfortunately, the injury on his hand got worse after the match. On the other hand, Damon and Lee started their mission to find their family. They beat Ron's men to get the key to the prison. Unfortunately, while they were trying to get the prisoners out, one of Ron's strongest guards heard their voices, so they had to finish him off. Thanks to their fighting skill, Lee and Damon managed to defeat the man and free the prisoners. At the same time, Ron opened the final match between Draco and Michael. The audience seemed to be looking forward to this match, especially since the two were the best. Without waiting any longer, the fight began. Because of his worsening injury, Michael couldn't use his full strength, and of course, Draco took advantage of this to knock him down in the arena. When Michael almost gave up, he remembered his late wife and Bree, and as a result, he got up even though he was bleeding. He forced himself to beat Draco for the sake of his family. For the first time in history, someone was able to defeat Ron's mainstay fighter. In the end, all the surviving participants were happy because Michael's victory had freed them. Not long after, Marcus and the police came to arrest Ron and his accomplices, including the spectators who were making this tournament as entertainment. At that moment, chaos broke out. Seeing the arrival of Marcus, Lee, and the other fighters were shocked. Marcus apologized for coming late. Meanwhile, Lauren was trying to chase Ron, who was trying to escape. He used the chance to avenge his wife's death. Lauren could kill Ron easily, but Michael suddenly appeared and stopped him by saying that revenge would only add to the problems in life, so he should hand Ron over to Marcus instead. Hearing this, he obeyed Michael's words. After that, the participants left with their respective families. Julie approached Draco and asked him to change, but he instead gave her the middle finger, which made her furious and kicked him. In the end, Lauren was picked up by his son, who had come all the way from America. It turned out that his son had been looking for him all this time because he was trapped in Ron's headquarters. Finally, they were reunited.